Hi, boys and girls. Going to read chapter 7, and when I end chapter 7 on this same taping, I'm going to read chapter 8. There are only 9 chapters in Sarah Plain and Tall. I will post chapter 9 on Tuesday. So, okay, here we go. If you listen up in this chapter, Sarah and Papa and Caleb and Anna get visited by Matthew and Maggie. They are neighbors. But remember, in this time and in this place, neighbors are very, 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 very far away. They don't see their houses from where they are. And Maggie is somebody who also answered an ad for a wife, and she is now married to Matthew. So listen for their characters and listen for the names of some interesting flowers in chapter 7. Okay, here we go. Chapter 7. The dandelions in the fields had gone by, their heads soft as feathers. The summer roses were opening. Our neighbors Matthew and Maggie came to help Papa plow up a new field for corn. Sarah stood with us on the porch, watching their wagon wind up the road, 2 horses pulling it and one tied in back. I remembered the last time we had stood here alone, Caleb and I, waiting for Sarah. Sarah's hair was in thick braids that circled her head, wild daisies tucked in here and there. Papa had picked them for her. Old Bess and Jack ran along the inside of the fence, whickering at the new horses coming. Papa needs 5 horses for the big gang plow, Caleb told Sarah. Prairie grass is very hard. Matthew and Maggie came with their 2 children and a sack full of chickens. Maggie emptied the sack into the yard and 3 red banty chickens clucked and scattered. They are for you, she told Sarah, for eating. Sarah loved the chickens. She clucked back to them and fed them grain. They followed her around, shuffling and scratching primly in the dirt. I knew they would not be for eating. The children were young and named Rose and Violet after flowers. They hooted and laughed and chased the chickens, who flew up to the porch roof, then the dogs, who crept quietly under the porch. Seal had long ago fled to the barn to sleep in the cool hay. Sarah and Maggie hitched the horses to the plow, and then they set up a big table in the shade of the barn, covering it with a quilt and a kettle of flowers in the middle. They sat on the porch while Caleb and Matthew and Papa began their morning of plowing. I mixed biscuit dough just inside the door, watching. You are lonely, yes? Asked Maggie in her soft voice. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Slowly I stirred the dough. Maggie reached over and took Sarah's hand. I miss the hills of Tennessee sometimes, Maggie said. Now Anna is thinking right now, boys and girls, so the next line is Anna thinking. Do not miss the hills, Maggie, I thought. I miss the sea, said Sarah. Do not miss the hills, do not miss the sea. I stirred and stirred the dough. I miss my brother William, said Sarah, but he is married and the house is hers now. Not mine any longer. And there are 3 old aunts who all squawk together like crows at dawn, and I miss them too. There are always things to miss, said Maggie, no matter where you are. I looked out and saw Papa and Matthew and Caleb working. Rose and Violet ran in the fields. I felt something brush my legs, and I looked down at Nick, wagging his tail. I would miss you, Nick, I whispered. I would. I knelt down and I scratched his ears. I miss Mama. I nearly forgot, said Maggie on the porch. I have something for you. I carried the bowl outside and I watched Maggie lift a low wooden box out of the wagon. Plants, she said to Sarah, for your garden. My garden? Sarah bent down to touch the plants. Yes, zinnias and marigolds and wild feverfew. You must have a garden wherever you are. Sarah smiled. I had a garden in Maine with dahlias and columbine and nasturtiums, the color of the sea when it sets. I don't know if nasturtiums would grow here. We'll try, said Maggie. You must have a garden. We planted the flowers by the porch, turning over the soil and patting it around them and watering. Lottie and Nick came to sniff, and the chickens walked in the dirt, leaving prints. In the fields, the horses pulled the plow up and down under the hot summer sun. Maggie wiped her face, leaving a streak of dirt. Soon you can drive your wagon over to my house, and I'll give you more. I have tansy also. Sarah frowned. I have never driven a wagon. I can teach you, said Maggie, and so can Anna and Caleb and Jacob. Sarah turned to me. Can you? She asked. Can you drive a wagon? I nodded. And Caleb? Yes. Oh, in Maine, said Sarah, I would walk to town. Here it is different, said Maggie, and here you will drive. Way off in the sky, clouds gathered. Matthew and Papa and Caleb came in from the fields, their work done. We all ate in the shade. We are glad you are here, said Matthew to Sarah. A new friend. Maggie misses her friends sometimes. Sarah nodded. There is always something to miss, no matter where you are, she said, smiling at Maggie. Rose and Violet fell asleep in the grass, their bellies full of meat and greens and biscuits. And when it was time to go, Papa and Matthew lifted them into the wagon to sleep on blankets. Sarah walked slowly behind the wagon for a long time, waving and watching it disappear. Caleb and I ran to bring her back, the chickens running wildly behind us. What shall we name them? Asked Sarah, laughing as the chickens followed us into the house. I smiled. I was right. The chickens would not be for eating. And then Papa came, just before the rain, bringing Sarah the first roses of summer. That is the end of chapter 7. If you want to pause it now and answer the questions that go with that chapter, you're welcome to. Or you can continue and listen to chapter 8. Listen to it now or later. I want you to pay attention to the fact that the author has mentioned a couple of times that the weather seems to be changing. She's mentioned a big cloud forming and the rain, Papa coming in just before the rain. So let's see what happens next. Chapter 8. The rain came and passed, but strange clouds hung in the northwest, low, black, and green. The air grew still. In the morning, Sarah dressed in a pair of overalls and went to the barn to have an argument with Papa. She took apples for old Bess and Jack. Women don't wear overalls, said Caleb, running along behind her like one of the chickens. Well, this woman does, said Sarah crisply. Papa stood by the fence. I want to learn how to ride a horse, Sarah told him. And then I want to learn how to drive the wagon. By myself. Jack leaned over and nipped at Sarah's overalls, and she fed him an apple. Caleb and I stood behind Sarah. I can ride a horse, you know, said Sarah. I rode once when I was 12. I will ride Jack. Jack was Sarah's favorite. Papa shook his head. No, not Jack, he said. Jack is sly. Well, I am sly too, Sarah said stubbornly. Papa smiled. Yeah, he said, nodding. But not Jack. Yes, Jack, Sarah said in a voice that was very loud. I can teach you how to drive a wagon. I have already taught you how to plow. And then I can go to town by myself. Say no, Papa, Caleb whispered beside me. Well, that's a fair thing, Sarah, said Papa. We'll practice. A soft rumble of thunder sounded. Papa looked up at the clouds. Today? Can we begin today? Asked Sarah. Tomorrow is best, said Papa, looking worried. I have to fix the house roof. A portion of it is loose, and there is a storm coming. We, said Sarah. What? Papa turned. We will fix the roof, said Sarah. I've done it before. I know about roofs. I'm a good carpenter. Remember, I told you. There was thunder again. Papa went and got the ladder. Are you fast? He asked Sarah. I am fast and I am good, said Sarah, and they climbed the ladder to the roof. Sarah, with wisps of hair around her face, her mouth full of nails, overalls like Papa's, overalls that were Papa's. Caleb and I went inside to close the windows. We could hear the steady sound of hammers pounding the roof overhead. Why does she want to go to town by herself? Asked Caleb. To leave us? I shook my head, weary with Caleb's questions. Tears gathered, though, at the corners of my eyes. But there was no time to cry, for suddenly Papa called out, Caleb! Anna! We ran outside and saw a huge cloud, horribly black, moving toward us over the north fields. Papa slid down off the roof, helping Sarah after him. It's a squall, he yelled. He put up his arms, and Sarah jumped off the roof. Get the horses inside, he ordered Caleb. Get the sheep, Anna, and the cows. The barn is safest. The grasses flattened. There was a hiss of wind, a sudden pungent smell. Our faces looked yellow in the strange light. Caleb and I jumped over the fence and found the animals huddled by the barn. I counted the sheep to make sure they were all there and herded them into a large stall. A few raindrops came, gentle at first, then stronger and louder, so that Caleb and I covered our ears and stared at each other without speaking. Caleb looked frightened. I tried to smile at him. Sarah carried a sack into the barn, her hair wet and streaming down her neck. Papa came behind, Lottie and Nick with him, their ears hard against their heads. Wait, cried Sarah, my chickens! No, Sarah, Papa called after her, but Sarah had already run out from the barn into a sheet of rain. My father followed her. The sheep nosed open the stall door and milled around the barn, bleating. Not bleating, but bleating is the sound they make. Nick crept up under my arm, and a lamb, Maddie with the black face, stood close to me, trembling. There was a soft paw on my lap, and then a gray body. Seal. And then, as the thunder pounded and the wind rose, there was the terrible crackling of lightning close by. Sarah and Papa stood in the barn doorway, wet to the skin. Papa carried Sarah's chickens. Sarah came with an armful of roses. Sarah's chickens were not afraid, and they settled like small red bundles in the hay. Papa closed the door at last, shutting out some of the sounds of the storm. The barn was eerie and half-lighted, like dusk without a lantern. Papa spread blankets around our shoulders, and Sarah unpacked a bag of cheese and bread and jam. At the very bottom of the bag were Sarah's hard shells. Caleb got up and went over to the small barn window. What color is the sea when it storms? He asked Sarah. Blue, said Sarah, brushing her wet hair back with her fingers, and gray and green. Caleb nodded and smiled. Look, he said to her. Look, what is missing from your drawing? Sarah went to stand between Caleb and Papa by the window. She looked out a long time without speaking. Finally, she touched Papa's shoulder. We have squalls in Maine, too, she said, just like this. It will be all right, Jacob. Papa said nothing, but he put his arm around her and leaned over to rest his chin in her hair. I closed my eyes, suddenly remembering Mama and Papa standing that way, and Mama smaller than Sarah, her hair fair against Papa's shoulder. When I opened my eyes again, it was Sarah standing there. Caleb looked at me and smiled until he could smile no more. We slept in the hay all night, waking when the wind was wild and sleeping again when it was quiet. And at dawn, there was the sudden sound of hail, like stones tossed against the barn. We stared out the window, watching the ice marbles bouncing on the ground. When it was over, we opened the barn door and walked out into the early morning light. The hail crunched and melted beneath our feet. It was white and gleaming for as far as we looked, like sun on glass, like the sea. And that is the end of chapter 8. I will post chapter 9 tomorrow, which is the end. I'm wondering if you're making predictions. Will Sarah stay? Will Papa and Sarah get married? What are your thoughts? And what are some signs you just saw in chapter 8 that may lead you to come to the conclusion that they may get married, or maybe you came to the conclusion that they won't? Think about what the clues in the story were. Bye for now.